Continued on next page. Afternoon session 12 p.m.
The court said, "Please be seated. Please have the jurors brought in. And please have the witness resume the stand."
Ms. Murray said, "Yes, Your Honor."
Jury present.
The court said, "Please be seated. Remember, sir, that you are still under oath."
The witness said, "Yes, Your Honor."
The court said, "You may proceed with the direct examination."
Ms. Murray said, "Thank you, Your Honor." Mr. Gartland, if you could please publish for the jury, alongside one another, Government Exhibits V0107 and V0108.
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Zhou, before we took a break, I believe we were talking about the Himalaya Exchange. We're going to pull up Government Exhibits V0107 and V0108. Ms. Murray said, "Mr. Gartland, if you could just unpublish while you're pulling those up." Thank you. I guess, Mr. Zhou, while we're waiting, you had mentioned that there were certain restrictions on purchasing Himalaya coin. Can you explain those to the jury? Please, your understanding in 2021 on what those restrictions were.
Yes. To allow to purchase H-coin, you have to have first you got to be a member of the farms, which you have to join the movement. Then based on that, it's all based on your previous investment, including donations. So once all that been counted, then you were able to get a pre-launch of the coins and at a discounted rate.
What do you mean by pre-launch?
Because this coin was launched on November 1st, 2021. All the investments was previously invested was counted towards to how much coin you could get.
And who, if anyone, calculated the amount of investment that you had pre-launch of the Himalaya coins?
The rule of guidance was set by Himalaya Alliance. For previous GTV there was deadline also. Made that draw line. For September 31st, anything donate investment, you place it before. You will get $1 investment for 0.5 coins. Any investments after that deadline, it's counted as $1 investment for 0.2 coins.
And who, if anyone, set those deadlines?
The deadline was announced by Milesqua.
Where was that announced?
During his broadcast.
At the time of the Himalaya coin launch in November of 2021, were you a member of any farms?
Yes.
Which farms?
UK London Club.
Did you communicate with anybody from the UK London Club regarding the Himalaya coin?
Yes.
With whom did you communicate about Himalaya coin?
I contacted the farm leaders.
Who was the farm leader of the UK farm at that time?
His name is David Dye.
How do you spell that last name?
D-A-I.
Can you describe what communications or conversations you had with David Dye at that time about Himalaya coin?
There were one for the resident in the States and other prohibited country couldn't purchase the Himalaya coin directly. That global alliance, Himalaya Alliance, established a business as nominee shareholdings to held those people's coins. Besides that, the farm also established Business Act as a nominee shareholdings to held those people's coins. Which I was included.
What business are you referring to that the farm established, or the alliance? Excuse me.
From the alliance, the company created called Freedom Media Venture Ltd.
And can you explain for the jury what you mean and you described Freedom Media Venture as a nominee?
Nominees act as on your behalf to hold your coins, for example.
And at that time, in the fall of 2021, how was it your understanding that Freedom Media Venture was a nominee?
It was public announced by Milesqua.
And what role, if any, did Freedom Media Venture have with respect to money that you paid for Himalaya coins?
The Freedom Media Venture, that company was a new company created for the GTV. So was announced that for those people who are in the restricted countries, then they will able to sign a contract and also offer, there was also fee will be charged was announced to us. He explained it to us.
Who explained that to you?
Milesqua mentioned it and also the other farm leader mentioned it.
What was the nature of the fee?
the fee I got was of 5%.
The court said, "What do you mean by restricted country?"
The witness said, "Yes, Your Honor. The Himalaya Exchange has a policy, and the policy laid out. There were countries not on their list, a permitted list to purchase or do any business or even become a user. The country were United States, Canada, Japan, North Korea, and other essential countries."
The court said, "You may continue."
Ms. Murray said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Zhou, for those restricted countries that you just mentioned, did you have an understanding of whether people who were located in those countries could invest in Himalaya coin?
Yes.
What was that understanding at that time, in 2021?
So that this created nominee shareholding companies that were able to have them as our shareholders. 2. To obtain the coins.
And did you in fact send money to purchase Himalaya coins through that nominee shareholder?
I didn't send the money direct to the shareholder. I send money to the farm.
Which farm?
UK London Club.
Did you enter into any kind? Was there any understanding between you and the UK London farm of what the purpose of the money that you sent was for?
Yes.
What was that understanding?
There were agreement, I signed it, with the farm leader, David Dye. He created a company act as the nominee shareholding company.
And generally speaking, what were the terms of that agreement that you entered into with the UK farm leader?
The term were just, they will hold my coins and also I have to pay the fee, annual fee to it. But in the future, once the Himalaya Exchange acquired legal license, was able to expand the territory, which the restriction related to those countries, especially to the United States. Then I would be able to use my own username accounts that would transfer the coins back to me.
And how was it your understanding at that time in 2021 that that's how the nominee shareholder kind of investment would work?
I'm sorry. Just one more time repeat the question.
Yeah, of course. So in 2021, how was it your understanding that at some point in the future you would be able to register your own account on the Himalaya Exchange?
Yes, mentioned by Miles Gua, yes.
So at the time that you sent money to the UK farm for the purchase of Himalaya coins, what assets, if any, did you have to the Himalaya Exchange?
I don't.
At that time in 2021, how, if at all, were you able to check the number of Himalaya coins that you held, that you had paid for?
Because the farm has my investment summaries and the summary document. All the investment I have previously invested, and also, there were ratios for the coins was calculated. The information was provided to me.
Provided to you by whom?
By one of the members, from UK London Club.
After you purchased Himalaya coin in 2021 through the UK farm, how, if at all, were you able to use that digital currency to purchase things?
'Cause I don't have access, so I don't know how you spend that.
Between your investment in 2021 and today, the present, have you had access to the Himalaya Exchange?
No.
Mr. Kumraju said, "Objection to form."
The court said, "Overruled."
Between your investment in 2021 and today, did there come a time when you were able to spend your Himalaya coin to purchase anything?
No.
I want to turn back for a moment, Mr. Zhou, to the volunteer work that you did for the whistleblower movement. Can you just remind the jury generally what types of services you provided?
Yes. I did video transcript, also translations, videos editing, and also streaming services. For the Himalaya Alliance, and the farm members.
In connection with your volunteer work, did there come times when you participated in meetings with other volunteers?
Yes.
What types of meetings?
Those are private meeting with Miles Gua, with the farm members.
What was the nature of the meeting? Where did you all meet?
We used the social platform called WebEx.
And what, if anything, was discussed during meetings among the volunteers over WebEx?
These meetings include briefing of the farm movements, activities, also the followers' investments. And also some other issues, among just Farm and the Global Alliance, and also, there were, at the time, the Global Alliance. One wanted to create a central data center to centralize all the investors' investment informations. And those meeting was conducted, and also Global Alliance asked each farm, come to the farm meetings. Give them guidelines, have them to turn over all their bookkeepings. And also the balance to the designated accounts by the Himalaya Global Alliance.
Mr. Zhou, in the course of your volunteer work, you said you were involved with streaming broadcasts. Did that include broadcasts relating to activities by the NFSC?
Yes.
Did that include broadcasts relating to protests?
Yes.
What types of protests did you stream broadcasts of, in your volunteer work?
In late 2022, there were protests. A name called 90 Days Protest was protesting one of Miles' Gov't attorneys and their attorney firms.
What, generally, was the subject matter of the 90 Days protest?
There was involved with Miles' Govt's bankruptcy cases. And so the protest was because Miles' Gov't announced he was being extorted by one of the attorneys for the amount of $250 million.
Taking a step back for a moment. Did there come a time when you learned that Miles' Gov't had filed for bankruptcy?
Yes.
Around when did you learn that?
Miles' Gov't personally did on his broadcast, on February 15, 2022.
What, if anything, did Miles' Gov't say during his broadcast about having filed for bankruptcy?
He just mentioned, I'm signing today my bankruptcy, and because I'm being persecuted.
By whom, if anyone, did Miles' Gov't claim that he was being persecuted?
He mentioned the persecution from CCP, and also he mentioned some of the CCP penetrated U.S. justice.
At the time that Miles' Gov't said that in February of 2022, did you believe that he was filing bankruptcy in part because he was being persecuted by the CCP?
At that time I believed it.
Returning to the 90 Days protest, around when did the 90 Days protests begin?
The 90 days started towards to end of October 2022, and last.
Sorry. Go ahead.
And last until end of January.
And why, if at all, were NFSC members protesting during that time period?
Because Miles' Gov't announced that extortion from the bankruptcy cases. And so there were protests started at multiple locations.
Can you explain what you mean and you say that Miles' Gov't announced extortion?
During his broadcast he mentioned he was being extorted by this attorney, and also he mentioned the amount. $250 million.
And which attorney?
The attorney name is Luke Despens.
Based on Miles' Govt's broadcast, what was your understanding of Luke Despens' role, if any, in the bankruptcy?
He was court-appointed trustee for Miles' Gov't.
And at that time in 2022 what, if anything, did Miles' Gov't say about the $250 million that you mentioned?
He said, that's unbelievable, outrageous, he was mad about that.
The court said, when you say court-appointed trustee, what court are you referring to?
The witness said, yes, Your Honor. I believe that's New York Southern District Bankruptcy Court.
Mr. Zhou, against whom were the protests directed, the 90 Days protests in 2022?
There were protests at the attorney Luke, attorney's home, his daughter's universities, his ex-wife's home, his law firm office, and one of his associates' attorney's home, and one of Luke's second daughter's workplace.
Who, if anyone, directed the protests?
Right after Miles mentioned about this extortion, then the Himalaya Global Alliance initiate launch all the protests.
Can you describe how the Himalaya Global Alliance launched the protests?
It was organized so the recording of sending out the form to the farms, asking who willing to come to the protests, and we also received information that this protest will last 90 days. So the farm leaders started gathering the information, putting people in place, and was also printing materials for the protests.
Which farm leader are you referring to?
At the time I'm associated with the new farm, it's called the Washington, D.C. farm.
And what types of materials did the farm leader print in connection with the 90 Days protests?
There were posters, banners, and flyers.
Can you describe for the jury some of the posters that were created for the protests?
Yes. Some poster had the attorney's Luke's image, his photos on it, but was altered. Was also added with titles, especially some offensive, some kind of meaningful, very mean labels on that posters.
What are some examples of the language that was added to those posters that were used in connection with the protests?
Mostly they called him CCP running dog, evil.
At the time of the 90 days protests in 2022, did you believe that Luke Despens was, and I'm quoting the language, a CCP running dog?
At that time I believed it.
Why did you believe it?
Because Miles Guo mentioned the extortion and Miles Guo mentioned Luke Despens' firms was bribed by the CCP.
At the time in 2022, did you have any personal knowledge of whether Luke Despens had extorted or attempted to extort Miles Guo?
No.
At the time in 2022, did you have any personal knowledge of whether Luke Despens' firm had been influenced by the CCP?
No.
Sitting here today, do you believe that Luke Despens was operating on behalf of the CCP?
Mr. Kamraju said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "If you'll step up, please."
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
The court said, "Why would his belief today be relevant?"
Ms. Murray said, "Your Honor." Because it goes to the fact that at the time he was operating on, his intent to behave and participate in the protest was what he was told by Mr. Guo.
The court said, "So you've established that."
Ms. Murray said, "Yes."
The court said, "But then you've asked what he believes now, and I'm trying to understand why that would be relevant."
Ms. Murray said, "I think it goes, Your Honor, to what I'm going to be getting to at the end. Which is when he came to the realization that this was all fraudulent. He was a believer in Miles Guo up until basically after the arrest. And then at some point he came to realize that what Miles Guo was telling him about the CCP's influence, about, the closing bank accounts because of the CCP, about all these activities was not in fact true. And that was the moment when he kind of came to the realization. And I expect that Mr. Kamraju is going to be cross-examining him on what his belief was at the time and what, why he is now testifying for the government. And I'm just trying to establish that."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Well, I don't think his belief sitting here today on the stand as to whether Mr. Despens is an agent of the CCP has any relevance to the line of inquiry that Ms. Murray is talking about. If she wants to ask him questions like, when did you become suspicious? That's still at a point back in time, has nothing to do with what he's saying now, what he's getting at now."
The court said, "So stick to that sort of question."
Ms. Murray said, "Okay."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said, "You may continue."
Ms. Murray said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Zhou, what, if anything, was your role with respect to the 90 days protest?
My role was streaming technician. I use software to push out the broadcast. I connect the farm and the guests. Also, I make schedule for the technician parts, who do that daily streamings.
And who, if anyone, gave you instructions regarding how to stream the 90 days protests?
There were guidelines provided by the Himalaya Global Alliance, some guidelines specific. During the protests, if we hear any of the guests, or the farm guests, that mention Miles Guo, or if they say something that was organized, we'll cut the streaming.
Can you just explain that guideline a little bit more so that the jury understands? What was the instruction that was given regarding streaming if someone mentioned Miles Guo?
Yes. Because all the streaming was conduct lively. There were people at the protest locations linked to remote guests. As technician on the back end. So we would receive these instructions, if either one inside the streaming, the image, or guest spoke that. I'm here protest today, it's because Miles told me, or the organization told me come, if that word said. We'll automatic cut the streamings.
And did there come a time when you were streaming the 90 days protests that you had to cut the transmission because of a reference to Miles Guo?
I personally did once.
I'd like to return for a moment to the Himalaya coin investment. Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if you could please publish what's in evidence as Government Exhibit V0107 and V0108. All right. Actually, we'll move along for a moment. Ms. Loftus, if you could please publish Government Exhibit V0105.
Sorry. Got it.
Mr. Zhou, do you recognize Government Exhibit V0105?
Yes.
What is it?
This is a meeting attended on WebEx with Milesqua and the UK London Club members.
Starting at the top left, who is that in the screen that's shown on the top left?
That's me.
And just to the right of you, who is that?
Milesqua.
In the image next to Milesqua, on the other side of you, it appears that there's a poster. Can you read what that poster says?
Yes, thank you. Speaking Himalaya London Club UK. Host.
Sorry. Just to the left of that, there's a screen with just a white wall and a poster. What does that poster say?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Got it. New Federal State of China.
And now going one further to the right, which you just read. What is it indicating about the person who's depicted in that screen?
That's UK London Club leader David Dye, and he hosts the WebEx software. The meeting was launched by his account.
And do you recognize the flag behind David Dye?
Yes.
What is it?
That's NFSC flag.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could take that down and put up for the witness what's marked as Government Exhibit V0106. Your Honor, just in an abundance of caution, the government moves to admit the prior exhibit, which is Government Exhibit V0105.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection, Your Honor.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit V0105 received in evidence.
Ms. Murray said, and this is Government Exhibit V0106. This is shown just to the witness right now.
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Zhou, do you recognize Government Exhibit V0106?
Yes.
Generally speaking, what is it?
It's another meeting I participated. This meeting was with Milesqua and it was Iron Blood members with other farm members.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, the government moves to admit Government Exhibit V0106.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no objection.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit V0106 received in evidence.
Ms. Murray said, could we please publish?
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Zhou, starting at the top left here, who is depicted there on the top left of this screenshot?
It's another farm leader.
The leader of which farm?
Japan, Tokyo Stellar IS Farm.
On the top right, who is depicted in the screen that's shown there?
He's NFSC chairman.
And then looking at the bottom left, who is the person standing in what's depicted there?
Milesqua was standing.
Ms. Murray said, Ms. Loftus, if we could zoom in on that bottom left screen, please. Mr. Zhou, do you recognize anyone else who is depicted in that particular screenshot?
Yes.
Who?
All of them.
All of them?
Yes.
Can you describe, generally speaking, who these people are and what their roles were?
Right next to the Milesqua, this lady, her name is called Justice Sarah.
And then the male depicted seated kind of in the back on the left side?
Yeah. His name Long Island David.
What farm, if any, is Long Island David associated with?
He was associated with Mountain Spice, New York.
And then to the right, the individual who is second from the right in the back of the table here?
Her name was Fei Fei.
And then finally, the person who's farthest right in this photo?
Her name was Ruth Ray.
Generally speaking, what was discussed during this meeting that you participated in?
This meeting was gathered a lot of other farms management team, farm leaders, and some even invited members. Discuss about some issues reported to the Himalaya Global Alliance.
Ms. Murray said, "You can take that down, Ms. Loftus." Thank you. Mr. Zhou, did there come a time when the UK farm asked for your assistance with certain banking activities?
Yes.
Around when was that?
That's February 2022.
And who was the leader of the UK farm at the time?
David Dye.
Can you describe for the jury what, if anything, David Dye asked you to do?
Yes. He called me personally, asked me if I could help this farm and help all the followers to receive money and to help them to invest into the G-series.
And what, if anything, did David Dye say about why he wanted your assistance?
Because he had few other people established business and open banking accounts, but they were shut down. And they needed still people to open more accounts to help the followers.
What, if anything, did David Dye say about why those accounts had been shut down?
Some accounts, they were just mentioned because of CCP don't want those people to invest. And all CCP is doing, those accounts were being shut down.
At that time in February of 2022, did you believe that bank accounts had been closed because of the CCP?
Yes, at that time I believed.
What, if anything, did David Dye direct you to do with respect to opening bank accounts?
Yes. We talked about how to open an account, what to tell the bank. And also gave me instruction with open business, we'll have him as 100% owner.
And what, if anything, did David Dye tell you to tell the bank as the purpose of those accounts?
Because of course David Dye also knows about my personal life as also my occupancy, sick, as a realtor. So he instructed that he mentioned it will be easier if I mention this account when we establish it's for real estate development. They're also matching my current occupancy so that will not trigger much of the flack. That will be more susceptible to open the account.
Did you follow David Dye's instructions and in fact open bank accounts?
Yes, I did.
After you opened those bank accounts, did money come into the accounts?
Yes.
Approximately how much money, in total?
Estimate about $2 million.
Were you able to determine the source of the money that came into your bank accounts that you opened?
I only able to see the wire, if it's from individual, or some of the wires, it's from business accounts.
Do you know how those individuals knew to send money to your bank accounts?
Mr. Kumraju said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Zhou, you mentioned that you saw incoming wires into the accounts, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you provide the account information to any of the individuals who wired money into your accounts?
No.
Do you know who, if anyone, provided your bank account information to those individuals?
Yes.
Who?
One of the member from UK London Club.
What, if anything, did you do with the money that came into your bank accounts that you had set up?
When I see the money, I will bookkeep, document it with a spreadsheet created by the UK leader. Once reached certain amount, I would receive instruction to where to send the money to.
From whom, if anyone, did you receive instructions regarding where to send the money?
The farm, the UK leader, and also other few the UK members.
Were you paid for opening those accounts?
No.
Did you keep any of the money that came through those accounts?
No.
I want to return for a moment to the Himalaya exchange. Ms. Murray said, "I'm going to try to do this old school." Your Honor, these are, again, V0107 and 108. I believe just before the break these were admitted, but again, in an abundance of caution. If they weren't formally admitted, we would move to admit.
The court said, no objection.
Mr. Kumraju said, "No, Your Honor."
The court said, they are admitted.
Government's exhibits V0107 and V0108 received in evidence.
Ms. Murray said, so this is Government Exhibit V0107. If we could publish to the jury. Can we publish that, please? Thank you.
By Ms. Murray.
Mr. Zhou, before we took the break, we were looking at this. This was something that was sent. I believe you said it was in your computer, is that correct?
Yes.
Did you prepare this spreadsheet?
No.
Do you know who prepared this spreadsheet?
I don't know.
Who sent this to you?
One of the UK member.
I want to just talk through a couple of the different columns here and what's reflected. First of all, there is a column, the second column says Discord. Do you see that?
Yes.
What information is shown there?
Coffee cantata, then 2 Chinese words.
Do you know who, if anyone, uses the Discord username Coffee Cantata?
I used it.
Looking across the rows here. Can you explain for the jury what information is reflected in the top portion of this spreadsheet?
Sure. Under the member ID number, member, UK 2020H170, its unique ID assigned to me for investment. Move to the right, after the Discord, on top account called as 005. That's the investment account calls created by the Himalaya Global Alliance. Right next to it, coin rates. That reflects to Himalaya coins, as 0.5. Then right after, it's the Chinese translate to investment a month. Then right after, next column, it's Chinese reflect to translate to welfare coins numbers, which reflect to H coins numbers.
So focusing on the different rows, and is it correct that the second to the most right column, the one with the little emoji or the icon, that column reflects investment amounts, is that correct?
Yes.
So taking the first row, what investment, if any, is reflected there at 59.93?
That reflected to an investment called Apple Coins.
And was that an investment that you made in connection with the G series offerings?
Yes.
Looking at the next row, 31,300, what investment, if any, does that reflect?
That reflect to VOG investments.
And that was in connection with which company's private placement?
Hui Media's GTV placement.
Looking at the next 2 rows, both of them have account code 8142. 50,000 and 20,000. What investment, if any, does that relate to?
The $50,000 reflect to my G Club Tier 5 investments, $20,000 reflect to G Club Tier 2 investments.
And then the next row, the 21,000, what investment, if any, does that reflect?
That reflect to my UK Farm Loan Agreement investments.
And finally, the row that's 1,500, what, if anything, does that reflect?
That reflected to my donations.
And so looking at the rightmost column, what information is in the rightmost column that was relevant to your Himalaya coin purchase?
So that's using the coin rates calculation, 0.5, multiplied by my investment, how much coin I will receive.
And how much coin did you receive based on your prior investments?
40,935 coins.
Ms. Murray said, we can take this down. Mr. Zhou, did there come a time when you requested a refund of any of the money that you had invested in the G series?
Yes, I did.
Approximately when was that?
July 15, 2023.
And which money, if any, did you request to have refunded?
I request my G Club investment refund.
How did you request a refund of your G Club investment?
As instructed, for all the matters, I shall contact the farm leader first, so I contact Washington, D.C. farm leader to request the refund.
And what, if anything, was the response to your refund request?
It wasn't a pleasant, first they just provide a request form, asked me to fill it out.
Did you complete that form?
Yes, I did.
What happened next?
Then for a very long period of time I didn't get any response. So I have to contact them back and do a follow-up, multiple follow-ups. But they were trying to verify my investments. Then later, they asked me to fill out my request form. They asked me they only will return HDO to me, not as fiat currency to me.
And just to be clear, when you say HDO, What are you referring to?
Himalaya dollars.
The court said, and what do you mean by fiat currency?
The witness said, because all my investment originally send it to investment. G-series investment using wires. Paid in the dollar.
The court said, so you're saying dollars are fiat currency?
The witness said, correct. By Ms. Murray.
And Mr. Zhou, at the time that the farm offered to refund your G Club's money in HDO. Did you have access to a Himalaya exchange account?
I don't.
Did you have access to any of the Himalaya coins that you had sent money to the farm to purchase?
I don't.
At that time that you requested the refund and it was offered in HDO. Did you have personal knowledge whether you in fact owned Himalaya coins or Himalaya dollars?
I addressed that.
What do you mean by that?
I told them that this request to return my investment in HDO was not acceptable because I don't have HDO accounts. Himalaya exchange accounts, so I said I will only receive in the currency which is fiat currency.
And what, if anything, was the response to your saying that you wouldn't accept HDO for your refund?
So there's another long period of waiting time. They just asked me to wait.
Did there come a time when you received a refund of your G Club's money?
Yes, I did.
Around when was that?
December 1st, 2023.
And what were the circumstances of your receiving that refund?
I have to sign a forfeit H-coin agreement and I also have to return some equipments to them. So that's all the terms I have to agree to.
Taking the equipment, what type of equipment were you required to return?
Just because I was, as a streaming technician, Washington, D.C. Farm sent over certain equipment for the broadcast equipments I at the time was holding. So in a month, once I request my refund, they would ask me to also return the equipment as well.
You also mentioned you had to sign something forfeiting your Himalaya coin for the refund. Can you explain that to the jury, please?
Yes. Since I made a refund request, then they also send me agreement that I have to forfeit all the H-coin was previously acquired from investments.
And how much had you paid for that H-coin that you had to forfeit?
Total, I paid $5,500 for the coins.
Did you in fact sign that agreement to forfeit the $5,500 worth of H-coin?
I have no choice. I was forced to sign that.
At some point after you requested a refund of your G Club money, how, if at all, did the whistleblower movement respond?
From
Mr. Kamraju said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, as to form sustained.
Mr. Zhou, did anyone within the whistleblower movement, to your knowledge, become aware that you'd requested a refund?
Mr. Kamraju said, objection, Your Honor. Same.
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Zhou, did there come a time when you were removed from the UK farm?
Yes.
Can you describe what happened?
Right after I returned equipment, the farm leader just removed me out of the Discord server. Cut all the communications, and also they removed me out of all the working channels, either the farm, Discord, WhatsApp. I was completely removed.
Around when did that happen that you were removed from the farm Discord channel?
That was in September 2023.
Directing your attention to January of 2024, did there come a time when your information was posted on Gov't?
Mr. Kamraju said, objection to form, Your Honor. What information?
The court said, sustained.
Ms. Murray said, why don't we just pull up Government Exhibit V02, which is in evidence? Mr. Zhou, do you recognize this?
Yes.
What is it?
This is a post on guitarasocialmedia.com.
And can you just remind the jury what Gov't is?
Yes, Gov't was of the G series. It's a social platform created by Milesqua and it's similar as the Twitters.
Looking at the English translation that was associated with this post, can you read the title of this announcement?
Global Himalayan Farm Alliance Blacklist Announcement.
What, if anything, do you understand a blacklist to be with respect to the Himalaya Farm Alliance?
For anyone accused to or against this movement, or Miles Guo personally, would be put on the blacklist.
Looking at item 2 that's listed here, can you please read that?
I'm sorry. One more time, please.
Yes. Can you read item 2 that's listed here?
Yes. On January 21, 2024, Washington, D.C. Farm and the Collations made the following blacklist decision: blacklisted. Coffee Cantata, Wenlu, in Chinese. Number 5082 Coffee Cantata. Reason for exclusion: malicious attack on whistleblower revolution and the G series. Blacklist persons have the right to submit an appeal within 5 days of the day of announcement. An appeal will be ignored.
Mr. Zhou, Coffee Cantata, that's the username that you used?
Yes.
Were you given any notice in advance of this blacklist announcement being posted on Gov't?
No.
What was your reaction, if any, to being posted publicly on the blacklist?
First, I saw this afterwards. That's just not the truth. I never attacked the whistleblower movement. Or the G series.
Did you appeal this blacklist decision?
Because what I saw was already after the appeal dates, allowance dates.
Ms. Murray said, "We can take this down, Ms. Loftus." Thank you.
The court said, "What is your answer, sir?" She asked whether you appealed.
The witness said, I couldn't because I saw this post was after this appealing allowance dates.
The court said, "You may continue."
Ms. Murray said, "Thank you."
By Ms. Murray.
Did there come a time when you stopped supporting Miles Guo?
Yes.
Around when was that?
That's around June 2023.
Why did you stop supporting Miles Guo around June of 2023?
Because there's a lot of the movement, the actions, I personally seen is wrong. I don't want to be part of it, so that's why I made the decision to stop.
Can you describe some of the actions that you're referring to?
Because there's also province within the Farms and the Global Alliance. Especially the UK London Club. The leader was accused of misproper use the rule of law foundation monies. There's a lot of problems never get really solved. And I have personally reported a lot of the problems never got answer or solved.
Mr. Zhou, in total, how much money did you spend on the G series offering we've been discussing?
Total about $120,000.
And how did you pay for those investments or those costs of the G series?
Mr. Kumraju said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said, "Sustained as to form."
Mr. Zhou, what was the source of the money that you spent on the G series offering?
Mr. Kumraju said, "Same objection."
The court said, "Step up, please."
Continued on next page. At the sidebar.
The court said, "So are you objecting on the basis that it isn't established that there was an offering?"
Mr. Kumraju said, "No, I'm objecting on the basis that the source of the money to pay for the offering is irrelevant."
The court said, "Overruled."
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said, "Overruled. You may answer."
The witness said, "Yes, Your Honor."
The source of the money was from my personal earnings, and also I sold my properties, condominium I sold. And I also took out my wife's life insurance.
Why did you sell your condos, your personal real estate property?
Because at the time I need to cash the Himalaya exchange coin launch, but I invest into G Club. So at the time I don't have enough capital, but only thing I had was my condominium. I have to, and I sold it.
What about your wife's life insurance? Why, if at all, did you cash out the life insurance policy?
That money, she agreed to put it into the farm loan.
Mr. Zhou, how much profit, if any, did you make from the $120,000 or so that you spent on the G series offerings?
Zero profit.
How much money in total did you lose, if any, through those offerings?
I lost about $30,000.
$30,000?
Or more.
At the time that you invested in the G series offerings, did you believe that they would be profitable?
Yes.
At the time that you invested in the G-series offerings, did you believe that Miles Guo would personally pay for any losses that you sustained from those investments?
At that time I believed it.
Did Guo in fact repay you for the approximately $30,000 that you lost through the G-series investments?
No.
Ms. Murray said, "May I have a moment, Your Honor?" Nothing further.
The court said. Cross-examination.
Mr. Kumraju said, yes. Thank you, Your Honor. Cross-examination.
By Mr. Kumraju.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Mr. Zhou.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. Now you just testified that Mr. Guo has never repaid you the amount that you say that you lost, correct?
Correct.
You've never spoken with Mr. Guo, right?
I spoke to him.
You spoke to him about getting the money back.
No.
You've never asked him to get any money back, correct?
I mailed it to him.
You mailed it to Mr. Guo.
Yes.
Mr. Guo doesn't use email, correct?
I mailed it to.
Ms. Murray said, "Objection."
The court said, sustained.
You've never emailed Mr. Guo before, have you?
I didn't email to him.
Okay. So he's never responded to an email that you've sent, correct?
Never responded.
And he's never sent you personally an email, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now I want to start with the rule of law foundation. Do you remember testifying about that?
Yes.
And you testified that you first heard about it at a press conference in November 2018, correct?
Correct.
And your testimony was that you left that press conference with the impression that Mr. Guo was going to fund the Rule of Law Foundation to $100 million. Correct?
Correct.
And that's what the prosecutors asked you here today, right?
Yes.
Mr. Kumraju said, "Could we have Government Exhibit W1005V, please? It's in evidence, so we can publish it. If we can just play it a little bit."
Video played.
Mr. Kumraju said, "Okay. We can pause right there." Now they asked you about this clip earlier, correct?
Yes.
They asked you whether you had an understanding that Mr. Guo had made a representation about funding $100 million to the Rule of Law Foundation. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. That's not Mr. Guo, right?
That's not.
That's Steve Bannon, right?
Correct.
Steve Bannon looks nothing like Mr. Guo, right?
No.
Ms. Murray said, "Objection, Your Honor."
The court said. Overruled. Go ahead.
This is Steve Bannon talking, correct?
Correct.
So they asked you a question about representations Mr. Guo made, but they showed you a clip of Mr. Bannon. Correct?
Correct.
But then you answered that your expectation was Mr. Guo was going to fund the payment, right?
Correct.
Now this isn't the first time that you've seen this video clip, right?
Correct.
You've seen it when you prepared with them before, right?
I saw it at the live, when this press conference live.
Okay. We'll come back to that. But you've also seen it with the prosecutors, right?
Yes.
They've showed it to you before today, right?
Yes.
They showed it to you when you prepared your testimony with them, right?
Not prepared the testimony, but they showed it to me.
Okay. Well, you've met with the prosecutors multiple times, right?
Yes.
These prosecutors sitting at the table here, right?
Not all.
Some of them, right?
Yes.
Which ones?
4 of them.
Okay. So the 4 people sitting here at the front of the table?
Not the left 4 but.
Okay. Some set of those people, correct?
Correct.
And there was an FBI agent there, right?
No. I don't know.
There wasn't an FBI agent there the first time you met with the prosecutors?
I don't know if the FBI. I don't know.
Was there a translator there the first time you met with the prosecutors?
No.
There was no translator when you first met with them?
No translator.
So you've never used a translator to speak with the prosecutors, is that right?
I didn't use translators.
Okay. Now you testified that they showed you this clip during one of those meetings, right?
Correct.
How many meetings would you say you had with the prosecutors?
About 7.
About 7, right?
Yes.
So that's 7 times where you've met with the prosecutors to discuss the testimony that you gave today. Right?
Not discuss.
Okay. What did you talk about for 7 meetings then?
So I was being just asked the answer.
Okay. Well, what were they asking you about?
Asked related to the cases.
Right. They asked you the same questions they asked today, right?
Correct.
And you gave the answers, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And sometimes if they didn't like one of your answers, they asked a different question, right?
No.
So you're telling me during 7 meetings there was no point where they asked you a follow-up question. Is that your testimony?
They asked follow-up.
Ms. Murray said, objection.
The court said, sustained. Sustained as to what they were thinking.
Mr. Kamraju said, oh. My apologies, Your Honor.
The court said, you may ask whether they asked follow-up questions.
Mr. Kamraju said, oh, sorry. I thought that's what I asked.
By Mr. Kamraju.
So over the course of 7 meetings. It's your testimony that the prosecutors never asked you a follow-up question.
Ms. Murray said, objection. Mischaracterizing the witness's testimony.
The court said, sustained.
Okay. Now you testified that you have seen this clip both during a meeting with the prosecutors but you also saw it live. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now this clip is not everything that even Mr. Bannon has to say at that press conference, right?
That's correct.
He gives much longer remarks, right?
Yes.
He takes questions from the press, right?
Yes.
Okay. He talks about efforts that Mr. Gov't has made in support of the anti-CCP movement, right?
Yes.
He talks about Gov't media, correct?
Yes.
In fact, Mr. Bannon was even asked a question about whether the Trump administration was involved, right?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
No.
You don't recall that?
Never asked.
Okay. So your testimony was Mr. Bannon was never asked that question, right?
Could you repeat that one more time, please?
Yeah. Was Mr. Bannon asked by a reporter whether the Trump administration would be involved with the Rule of Law Foundation?
No. Mr. Bannon never mentioned about Trump.
Okay. And he was never asked, right?
In that conference, no.
Okay. Now Mr. Gov't did speak at that conference, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I think you talked about a few of the topics that he discussed during your direct testimony. Do you remember that?
Which topics?
Well, and forgive me if I get it wrong. But I believe one of the things you said was that he discussed investigating business deaths. Do you remember testifying about that?
I'm sorry. Not invest business stats. Investigate, Mr. Bannon said investigate mysterious Chinese businessmen's deaths.
Okay. What is that a reference to?
That reference to how this Rule of Law Foundation fund will be used.
Okay. Well. Mr. Bannon also talks about the fact that there had been an investigation into the death of a Chinese businessman. Correct?
Correct.
It was a chairman of a company called HNA, correct?
Ms. Murray said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
And Mr. Gov't had previously predicted the death of the chairman of HNA, correct?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor. Hearsay and relevance.
The court said, sustained.
Mr. Kumraju said, I'm not offering it for the truth, Your Honor.
The court said, if you'll step up.
At the sidebar,
The court said, the question was, and Mr. Gov't had previously predicted the death of.
Mr. Kumraju said, yes. I'm not offering it for the truth of the man's death, just simply that he predicted it. That he heard him say it.
The court said, during the conference?
Mr. Kumraju said, no. Prior to the conference, Your Honor.
The court said, well, how is it relevant?
Mr. Kumraju said, because the witness testified that Mr. Gov't had revealed what he referred to as classified information, and that's one of the things that attracted the witness. I don't mean classified in the setting that American government uses it. I mean confidential information about the Chinese government, and that was what attracted him. I'm just following up. I don't intend to spend a long time on it. I have 2 more questions.
Ms. Murray said, I don't see how it's not hearsay. I don't see how it's relevant.
The court said, I just don't recall this testimony that you're referring to, that you're saying this witness said that one of the reasons he was attracted to Mr. Gov't was because he mentioned the death of a businessman?
Mr. Kumraju said, no. He said that he knew that Mr. Gov't had unknown details. He referred to it as classified information. I'm not calling it that. But he referred to secret information about Chinese government officials. And that's what Mr. Gov't was revealing, that's one of the things that attracted him.
The court said, I have to say I don't recall that particular testimony. Is that what he said?
Ms. Murray said, he indicated that it was one of the topics that Miles Gov't had covered in his broadcast. But first of all, I think that the statement that Mr. Kumraju is referring to is not even covered in this broadcast. It's an out-of-court statement by Miles Gov't. I also don't think that the alleged prediction of the death of a Chinese businessman falls within this broad category of potentially classified information about Chinese government officials. I just don't see the connection.
The court said, so this prediction does not occur at the conference.
Mr. Kumraju said, no. Before the conference Mr. Gov't predicts that it will happen. The death happens prior to the conference. Mr. Bannon then notes at the conference that one of the things that Mr. Gov't has done is an investigation into the death of the businessman.
The court said, okay, I'm going to allow the question.
Mr. Kumraju said, thank you, Your Honor.
in open court.
The court said, overruled.
By Mr. Kumraju.
Sir, do you remember the question?
Could you please repeat it, please?
Yes. Mr. Kumraju said, I'm sorry to do this, but would the court reporter mind reading back the question, please?
Record read.
The court said, you may answer.
The witness said, yes, Your Honor.
Yes.
And Mr. Bannon discussed that at the press conference, correct?
Yes.
He talked about that Mr. Zhou will send people to investigate the death, correct?
Ms. Murray said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
That part one don't remember.
Okay. What do you don't remember Mr. Bannon talking about Mr. Zhou sending investigators?
Ms. Murray said, objection. Asked and answered, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained. Go ahead.
Now you testified on direct about your understanding of what the NFSC is, correct?
Correct.
And just remind us, what does NFSC stand for?
New Federal State of China.
All right. And it's comprised of individuals who would like to take down the Chinese Communist Party. Fair.
Yes.
And you were one of those people, right?
Yes.
And so you shared that goal, right?
Yes.
And now the NFSC, that's the new federal state of China, right? We're talking about the same thing.
Yes.
The NFSC was founded on June 4, 2020, correct?
Correct.
You watched the video about that founding, right?
Yes.
Mr. Guo was there, correct?
Correct.
He was in front of the Statue of Liberty, right?
Not in front of it. He was on his boat.
Okay. So the boat was in front of the Statue of Liberty, right?
Close to it.
And there were other people who appeared in the video, correct?
Yes.
One was a famous Chinese soccer star, right?
He appeared on stream, online.
Okay. So you could see him during the broadcast, right?
Yes.
Mr. Bannon was there also, right?
Correct.
And they were talking about the founding of this alternative government, right?
Yes.
Okay. And this is during the COVID pandemic, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now you talked a little bit about this on direct. But the idea is that the NFSC would be an alternative government to the Chinese Communist Party, right?
Yes.
And so you used the word on direct ecosystem. There were various businesses that comprised the ecosystem of the NFSC. Correct?
Yes.
So you talked about GTV, right? You testified about GTV. That was one of the companies that would be in the ecosystem.
Yes.
And G Clubs, that was another company that would be in the ecosystem, right?
Yes.
And the Himalaya Exchange, that was another company that would be in there, right?
Yes.
And each of these different components had a role to play as part of that ecosystem, correct?
The goal was the same.
They had a different purpose is what I'm trying to get at, right?
Purpose is all the same.
Okay. Well, let me try it this way. So GTV was a social media company, right?
Yes.
Himalaya Exchange was a cryptocurrency exchange, right?
Yes.
And they both do different things, right?
Correct.
But they were both intended to be part of the larger NFSC goal, right?
Ms. Murray said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
So in terms of purpose, GTV was intended to be sort of a social media platform that was devoid of CCP censorship, correct?
Yes.
And G Clubs was a way for NFSC members to associate with each other, correct?
No. It's for investments.
It's for investments.
Yes.
Didn't you testify on direct that you were going to get a passport as part of G Clubs, right?
Yes.
And that passport was going to be an NFSC passport, right?
Yes.
Okay. So G Clubs was for NFSC members, among other reasons, to associate with each other, correct?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
The court said, I'm going to allow the question.
Not to socialize with other members, because each investor is individually. We don't know their informations.
So you joined G Clubs, right?
Yes.
Okay. When you joined G Clubs, were you proud of joining G Clubs?
Yes.
Okay. You were showing your commitment to the NFSC. That was one of the reasons why you bought a G Clubs membership, right?
I want to get stock and also get a passport, which was promised.
Okay. I didn't ask you what was promised. I just asked why you did it, right?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, so don't testify.
Okay. You mentioned that you wanted to get a passport, right?
Yes.
And that was the NFSC passport, right?
Yes.
All right. You also testified about the farm loans, right?
Yes.
And the farm loans were intended to provide funding for the farm's work, right?
That was the fund. What will be used for?
Right. And you testified on direct, you said it would be used for the working capital of the farms. Right?
Correct.
So that's the farm's business, right?
Farm can use it as operation capitals.
Okay. So the farm has discretion to use it on its operations, right?
Yes.
So if the farm decides they want to spend it on this, they can spend it on this. If they want to spend it on that, they can spend it on that, right?
There's also restriction.
Okay. And that restriction was found in the loan agreement, is that right?
I don't remember that.
Okay. So you don't remember where this restriction is located, right?
Where located, I don't remember.
Okay. Now I believe you lived in China until 1998, correct?
Correct.
And the political goals of the NFSC. Is it fair to say they're easier to support in the United States than in China?
Yes.
Here you had the choice to spend your money on those products, right?
On which products?
Well, just take G clubs, right? That was your choice, you could spend on it, right?
Yes.
Like there was no government agency that stopped you from spending on it, right?
Correct.
And like this hat that you testified about, this was your choice, right? You could buy this hat if you wanted to, right?
Yes.
And the whistle that you talked about, your choice, right?
But all the purchases was also towards to grow the G fashions as one of the investments. I treated it as not just purely purchase items but to support the growth together.
Okay. To support the growth of the company, right?
As the shareholders.
Okay. But you weren't actually a shareholder in G Fashion, right?
No. Miles Guo mentioned our investment will including G Fashion stocks.
Continued on next page. By Mr. Kumraju.
You never had a share of G Fashion shares, correct, sir?
I don't have the shares.
Okay. You have no idea how many shares you even think you were promised, right?
Promised $1 per shares.
Okay. So $1 for everything you spent on G Fashion?
Not spend. It was G Fashion was in the future. The G Fashion's gross was towards to the G Series investments.
Okay. So going back to my original question though, that was your choice to spend on that, right?
Ms. Murray said, objection.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
Now, sir, you testified on direct you're in the real estate business, is that right?
Yes.
And you've been in the real estate business for more than 10 years, right?
Correct.
So you're pretty experienced in the business, right?
Yes.
Your company is called East West Luxury Group, is that right?
No, that's my small group.
I'm sorry.
That's my inner group.
That's your inner group. Okay. What's the name of your company? I'm sorry.
United Realty Group.
And do you specialize in any particular kind of property?
Yes.
What's that?
Residential.
Okay. Do you have a particular type of clientele?
What you mean by?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by particular?
Well, for example, do you specialize in high-end residential properties?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor. 402, 403.
The court said, overruled. You may answer.
I just the residential. I don't consider particular. If it's a high-end or it's low-income or it's affordable housing.
Okay. So you run the gamut, basically.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you advise your clients in connection with those transactions, right?
I'm sorry, which transactions?
Just your real estate business, right?
I'm only show the houses, provide informations on the houses. But I don't control monies or receive the monies.
No. Sir, I'm not trying to trick you. I'm not asking you if you receive the money or don't receive the money. All I'm asking is you advise your clients in connection with the purchase of their homes, right?
Yes.
Okay. And part of that advice is to tell them to pay attention to the deal they're entering into, right?
Correct.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, objection. Sidebar.
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor. The court previously ruled that you can't get into the details of the decisions that people made in the investments. It's veering into negligence, it's prejudicial, it's not relevant, this line of questioning. And it's, I think, over the line of and the argument that there was negligence associated with the investments that this witness testified to.
Mr. Kumraju said, I do not intend at all to argue negligence. The determination, 1, it goes to materiality, which the government has to prove. 2, Your Honor also said that as part of materiality, we were allowed to inquire into the sophistication of the potential investor's particular trades that might make that a reasonable investor. I'm not arguing that he should have done this or he should have done that. I'm just saying that part of materiality turns on what representations you're focused on. And sophistication is something that Your Honor has already explicitly said is fair game.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, these questions aren't going to sophistication of him as an investor, it's victim blaming. Asking him whether he advised clients in the course of his real estate transactions and whether those clients were high-end individuals. I don't see how that is remotely relevant to this individual's understanding of what the investment opportunities were or his motivation for investing in them.
The court said, so he's asked whether he advises the client to.
Mr. Kumraju said, pay attention.
The court said, pay attention to the details.
Ms. Shrofa said, read a contract of sale.
Mr. Finkel said, that's not appropriate. This is a fraud case. There's no reliance defense. You can't say to a victim of fraud, you should have read all these details, sir. This is victim blaming through another word. They are using materiality. And the jury is going to draw the wrong conclusion. It's a 403 problem.
Mr. Kumraju said, Your Honor is going to instruct the jury as to the elements of the offense. I'm sure the government will ask as to that instruction. Reliance is not relevant. I'm not sure I see.
The court said, well, I think that you're trying to get him to say that I advise my clients to use good judgment. And the implication is that he didn't follow his own advice.
Mr. Kumraju said, no, Your Honor. What I'm eventually going to set up is to the extent that he did not read documents when entering into these investments. Is because the information in those documents was not material to him. Which is directly as a joinder to the government's allegations of specific recommendations in those documents are material. It didn't matter to him what's in the farm loan agreement, to enter into the farm loan agreement. Then how it can be material?
The court said, did he actually discuss the specifics of agreements?
Mr. Kumraju said, he also told the FBI that he didn't read them.
The court said, but he testified today about the specific agreements. So I don't think you can argue that he said that he did not rely on the agreements at all.
Mr. Kumraju said, I'm allowed to impeach him on that, Your Honor.
The court said, well, I'm saying you can't say he didn't testify about examining the agreements.
Mr. Kumraju said, no, no, no. You're right, Your Honor. What I'm saying is I'm allowed to impeach that testimony to suggest that he didn't read those.
The court said you can challenge him on that. What I'm saying is you can't imply that he did not say today that he read the agreements.
Mr. Kumraju said, no, absolutely, Your Honor. I'm not intending.
The court said, so I am going to sustain the objection at this point because I do think that you're going down that road of the blaming of the victim.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay, Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, thank you.
In open court.
The court said, sustained.
By Mr. Kamraju.
Now, you testified on direct that you were interested in investing in GTV, correct?
Yes.
And you understood that the purpose of GTV was to be a social media platform, right?
Yes.
And that it was to broadcast material that was critical of the Chinese government, right?
Yes.
So that was one of the goals that the movement had, was to set up a social media network like that. Right?
For all people to use, yes.
Right. And the NFSC was actually, the public announcement of the NFSC was actually just 2 days after the GTV private placement closed. Correct?
Yes.
Now, you testified that you were hoping to earn a profit on GTV, right?
I'm sorry?
You testified that you were hoping to earn a profit on GTV, correct?
Yes.
But you understood it was a risky business, right?
Yeah. Miles Moore mentioned it, investment has risk.
Mr. Gov't said investment has risk, right?
Also he made a guarantee.
Well, I asked you if he said that it.
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor.
The court said, sustained. Continue your questions.
Now, you testified that Mr. Gov't told people who wanted to make an investment less than $100,000 that they had to contact Sarah Wei, right?
At the time, yes.
At the time. What do you mean by that?
Because the first announcement he mentioned who liked to invest, he didn't mention that.
Okay. So there came a point at which Mr. Gov't said, if you want to invest less than $100,000, you should go to Ms. Wei, right?
He didn't mention 100,000, less 100,000. He mentioned for other people that don't have that much can contact other farm leaders to invest. He will not let the followers left behind.
He didn't want the followers to be left behind, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So your testimony is he didn't mention $100,000, he just said smaller investments go to your farm leaders. Is that right?
No. He mentioned 100,000 is 2 tiers, 100,000 for a certain limited headcounts. It was 2,000 headcounts.
Okay. So there were 2,000 headcounts, to use your word, for people who wanted to invest $100,000 or more, right?
That's a minimum.
Right. So $100,000 or more, right?
Correct.
And then if you wanted to invest less than $100,000, he told you to go talk to people in the farms. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And that was the only dividing line, right? It was more than $100,000 or less than $100,000, right?
Yes.
And you personally decided that you wanted to invest less than $100,000, right?
Not decide, just I don't have $100,000 at the time.
Okay. Fair enough. You didn't have the $100,000, so you ended up investing less, right?
Correct.
All right. Now, you testified on direct that you watched a broadcast that Mr. Gov't did on April 21, 2020. Right?
April 20th.
This is the one that's announcing the GTV private placement, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And you watched that, right?
Yes.
Okay. You watched the whole thing.
Yes.
Mr. Kamraju said, could we bring up Government Exhibit GXC26T and go to page 1, please? The prosecutors, when they asked you about this, they only showed you one clip from the.
The court said, 1 moment please. It seems that one of our jurors, number 12, does not have the image on the screen.
Mr. Kamraju said, I think it may be a problem with that one screen, Your Honor.
The court said, Can you look onto juror number 11's screen? Juror number 12, are you able to look at juror number 11's screen? Okay. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Kamraju said, maybe we can blow up the paragraph. That's great. Thank you. Is that better? Okay.
By Mr. Kamraju.
Now, on direct, the prosecutors asked you about one clip from this broadcast, correct?
Yes.
They didn't show you the whole broadcast to testify about, right?
Correct.
So you see here where it says, this video is just a brief introduction. Do you see that?
I saw the English text, yes.
Could you read that, please, the highlighted portion?
This video is just a brief introduction to friends and fellow fighters who have the intention to invest in GTV so that you can understand the documents to be signed in the investment and during investment, as well as some basic procedures.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay. Can we go to page 5, please? Do you see the highlighted portion here?
Yes.
Could you read that, please?
Within 24 hours after you receive this video, you will receive the following documents from the law firm about the so-called private equity of GTV.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay. Could we go to page 2, please? Do you see the highlighted section here?
Yes.
Could you read that, please?
Please carefully read through all the documents to be signed for investment.
Okay. Mr. Kamraju said, could we go to page 16, please? Could you read that highlighted portion, please?
I just would like to make a brief explanation. But I will stress this one more time, please be sure to read the prospectus, subscription letter, shareholder agreement, and confidentiality agreement that are sent to you. Those will prevail.
Okay. So on repeated instances during the April 20th broadcast, Mr. Guo urged listeners to read the documents, correct?
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, same objection that we raised at sidebar.
The court said, the objection is sustained. Move on.
Do you know what he means when he says, prospectus?
He didn't speak that broadcast in English, his original words were in Chinese.
Mr. Kamraju said, I think we can take it down. We have the Chinese next to it. That's helpful. Your Honor, I'm sorry. Could we have a 20-second sidebar?
The court said yes.
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
Mr. Kamraju said, just before I continue, I just want to make sure I understand. Am I not permitted to ask him if he's read the prospectus?
The court said, I want to first hear the objection of the prosecution.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay.
Ms. Murray said, that question is not objectionable. But the questions that Mr. Kamraju has been asking are going again to kind of victim blaming and picking apart very specific details about what this victim did or didn't do in a way that is prejudicial. Is intended to kind of muddy the waters for this victim. If he wants to ask if he read the prospectus, he can ask if he read the prospectus.
Mr. Kamraju said, all I elicited was that Mr. Gov't directed investors to the prospectus where there is information surrounding the representations that the government is relying on. I want to be able to ask him if he read the prospectus. If he didn't, he didn't. That's what the entire line of questioning before was when I showed him the various parts. Was that Mr. Gov't is directing them to the document.
The court said, so it's not a don't you think you should have done that, you're not going to follow up with that.
Mr. Kamraju said, I don't intend to ask him, shouldn't you have read it, no.
The court said, just did you. That's it. And then you're done with that line of questioning?
Mr. Kamraju said, I mean, if he says yes, he read it, then I'm going to show him the document. I'm going to ask about specific representations about the document.
The court said, see, that's the problem. You can't go to those representations.
Mr. Kamraju said, actually, Your Honor. Your Honor ruled in the motion in limine under the Weaver case that we are allowed to show different representations in the PPM to go to materiality. The government explicitly argued that it only went to reliance. They cited Weaver. Weaver, in fact, says the disclaimers are relevant to the idea of materiality. So if you read the disclaimers, then I'm allowed to elicit them. Otherwise, I don't know how to elicit that other than through a witness who read the document.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, the representations that were made weren't only contained within the document. There is the broadcasts, there are other statements that he made. So to the extent that they want to inquire and find out what caused the witness to invest or what induced him to invest, they can ask that question without tying it to the language of the prospectus and going to this line of questioning. Then with respect to the specific question, did he read the prospectus, we don't object to that question. But it's the 20 questions that have led up to it and then the questions that would follow.
The court said, if he answers yes, then what questions do you feel are appropriate?
Ms. Murray said, I think it would be questions regarding the materiality of, I believe this is where Mr. Kumraju is going. The materiality of the guarantee that Gw't made that he would personally guarantee any losses. If the line of questioning is, here's what was stated in the prospectus. Were Gwt's statements that he would personally guarantee your money? Were those immaterial to your decision to invest because it's not listed in the prospectus anywhere? I don't think that's.
Mr. Kumraju said, well, first of all, I will note that the indictment alleges that the misrepresentation related to the securities fraud count and the wire fraud count related to GTV to be statements in the prospectus. So the idea that he made statements elsewhere that affected that, that's fine. They can argue that. But there's no universe in which the prospectus statements are not relevant. And the information surrounding those representations are not relevant unless they're dropping the count. Which I don't think they are.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, this is not the only victim who invested in the GTV offering. It's very clear that what they're trying to do is back into the sophistication. And a topic that Your Honor already ruled doesn't come in through this. Again, if they want to ask.
The court said, if you're relying on the representations in the indictment, how is it that it would not be proper to ask the witness about these representations mentioned in the indictment?
Ms. Murray said, well, I think first we would establish whether he read the prospectus.
Mr. Kumraju said, sure. I'm going to do that.
The court said yes, but if he answers yes, that's where I'm asking.
Ms. Murray said, if he answers yes. It's fair game to ask questions about certain of the language in the prospectus and determine whether he had read it at the time. But what we're concerned about is kind of the slippery slope of then going into the sophistication and victim blaming.
The court said, well, did you read it? Let's say he says yes. Then the next question is, did you consider the risk that was set out in the prospectus?
Mr. Finkel said, one way that Your Honor might want to contend with this, and I know it's been done in other fraud cases, is through a limiting instruction, which is simply telling the jury that whether the witness or the victims were sophisticated or not, were aware of risks that they avoided or relied on various disclaimers or not is not what's at issue here. The questions are being asked only for the purpose of assessing whether the representations that the witness testified about. Here, the representations about the guarantee and the use of GT funds, whether those are material. I have seen that done in other fraud cases.
The court said, okay, we're going to take a pause and I want you to draft this instruction.
Mr. Kumraju said, I'll just note, Your Honor, that everything he just said is a proper subject of a jury instruction. Not a limiting instruction in the middle of testimony.
The court said, I don't know that I agree with that.
Mr. Kumraju said, well, Your Honor, I'm not sure, first of all. Your Honor did say that we can acquire the sophistication of the investors because it goes into the materiality analysis. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. I get the idea that we can't argue that the victims are negligent or they should have done more. We're not precluded from arguing or eliciting testimony that these are sophisticated people. That's black-letter Second Circuit law. That's the Litvak case. The Litvak case says sophistication of the investors plays into it.
Mr. Finkel said, that's a civil case.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no, it's USV Litvak. So I don't, because you have to judge the reasonable investor standard by the investors who are in the market. That's what the law is. So that's one point. 2. I don't know how you get away from determining the materiality of any individual statement taken outside of the context of the larger document. There's no principle of law that supports that. If a guy says he read not this witness, but generally. If a person says they read a document, and document one section of the document says this is how we might use the money, and the other section of the document says those are just examples of how we use the money, it goes to the materiality analysis, Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, Your Honor, the Weaver case, which we briefed and which Your Honor ruled on directly addresses this. And it prevents defense counsel from eliciting this sort of testimony. What happened in Weaver, if I recall correctly, was essentially the defendant, the fraudster, was saying to victims, you're going to make millions of dollars. All that kind of stuff, right? Then, they would receive documents that would say something to the effect of, don't listen to anything I just said. A disclaimer. And so the defense wanted to put in a disclaimer to say, look, you should have looked at that disclaimer, victim. You should have known, victim, that you shouldn't have listened to the guy, the defendant, as to what he said. Second Circuit said you can't do that. Why can't you do that? Because fraud in a criminal context, there's no reliance on it. There's an objective reasonable standard which the jury will assess. But you can't. Defense counsel is asking questions about this all came about because they are asking questions about. Are you a good real estate broker? Do you point your clients to specific details in the contracts? Do you look over things? That goes to whether or not they were assessing disclaimers. That's not the issue. The issue is whether Gua's statements made in these broadcasts were lies, and whether, based on those lies, they were material to the victims, and so they sent money to Gua, and they did.
The court said, what does the prospectus say?
Mr. Finkel said, the prospectus says a number of things. One of the things that I think defense counsel is referring to with respect to the indictment is how the money would be used. For example, the prospectus doesn't say that the money would be sent to a hedge fund in the name of Mr. Gua's son. It says that the money would be used to essentially invest in GTV. There is no guarantee in the prospectus. And I think that's kind of what defense counsel is getting at, which is exactly on all fours with the Weaver case. Because in the Weaver case, again, the defendant was saying things that victims relied on, and were the reasons why the victim invested, and then later got disclaimers. And so the Second Circuit, Your Honor.
The court said, but do these documents contain disclaimers?
Mr. Finkel said, the prospectus?
The court said yes.
Mr. Finkel said, I believe there are some disclaimers in that document, yes, Your Honor.
The court said, like what?
Mr. Kamaraju said, like I'll give you an example. There's a chart that they rely on that they put into the indictment that said these are the contemplated use of proceeds. And then there's language that says this list is illustrative, right, which means it's examples, right. I'm allowed to elicit that to materiality. I'll just say one point on the Weaver case, Your Honor. Respectfully. You've already addressed this and you've already noted that the government's description of Weaver is precisely wrong. Because what they said in Weaver is that while there is no reliance element and the defense cannot make a reliance argument, they can point to those disclaimers for purposes of the materiality analysis. Which is what Your Honor has already found. So I don't know why we're revisiting the context in Weaver.
Mr. Finkel said, and that's why to obviate any potential juror confusion, a limiting instruction would be appropriate. And we'll draft one for the court's consideration.
The court said, all right, so that's what you'll do. You'll draft and we'll pause.
Mr. Finkel said, thank you.
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said, Members of the jury, we're going to take a brief pause. Remember that you're not allowed to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Don't permit anyone to discuss the case in your presence. I'll call you back shortly.
Jury not present.
The court said, you can step down. Don't discuss the testimony.
The witness said, sure, Your Honor. Witness not present.
The court said, please be seated.
Recess.
The court said, please be seated. Are the documents in evidence? The prospectus the other?
Mr. Kamaraju said, I don't believe so, Your Honor, no.
The court said, they are not in evidence. Okay, so on the issue of materiality, it is certainly material whether or not the witness read the documents. But where you cannot go is into a question like, shouldn't you have heeded the warnings?
Mr. Kamaraju said, understood, Your Honor. I don't intend to ask any question like that.
The court said, the proposed instruction is, when considering witness testimony, please note that negligence, carelessness, or gullibility on the part of the victims is no defense to a charge of fraud.
Mr. Kamaraju said, I'm sorry, Your Honor. I should have noted this. If you're going to use the word victims, we would at least ask you use the word alleged victims.
The court said, I have not even stated whether I'm going to use the instruction.
Mr. Kamaraju said, no, I know, Your Honor, and I apologize for jumping in. When I heard you read it again, it occurred to me that I missed that.
The court said, clearly if I were to read the instruction, I would use witness instead of victims. But why is it necessary to give this instruction now as opposed to when I'm instructing the jury at the end of the case?
Mr. Finkel said, Your Honor, it's a correct statement of law, and it absolves the jury from any confusion. And I think the jury would reasonably be confused. They might be thinking, I wouldn't have invested in this. I would have known that this didn't make any sense. I would have known to read the disclaimer and look at all the language. And that's what laypeople who don't understand the fraud law that we all do would expect. So this instruction, which is a correct statement of law, resolves that issue. And I think appropriately contextualizes the line of questioning that defense counsel has advanced.
Mr. Kamaraju said, well, Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, it's also a long trial.
Mr. Kamaraju said, well, it is a long trial. So Your Honor is going to instruct the jury that they should begin deliberations at the close of all evidence. You're going to instruct them, I presume, as to the proper elements of the law. And so when they are considering this witness's testimony, as long as anybody else, they will have the appropriate law to guide them. There's no need to preview government arguments about the law to the jury now, when this is not a question. For example, of like, is evidence being offered for this purpose or this purpose? It ultimately goes to the elements of the offense. And Your Honor can address it at the time that you address all the other elements of the offense. Which is when you instruct the jury as to the law, at the close of evidence.
Mr. Finkel said, it exactly is the kind of issue where the evidence is being offered for a particular purpose. It's being offered for the purpose of materiality. And a jury doesn't know what all of this means. So what Your Honor is doing is delivering to them a correct statement of law so they can understand the evidence as they sit through the trial. As I understand, looking back on the briefing on this issue, defense counsel doesn't object generally to the concept that negligence is not a defense. And so we think Your Honor instructing the jury of that is appropriate so they understand how to use the evidence that defense counsel is seeking to adduce.
The court said, so I agree with Mr. Kamaraju that it is not appropriate to give the instruction at this time. But I want to talk about what you can and cannot ask. You can ask whether he has read those documents. If you get a no, it stops there. The inquiry stops there. There's no shouldn't you have.
Mr. Kamaraju said, 100%, Your Honor. I do not intend if he says no. I'm not going to ask him more questions about the document or should he have read it or shouldn't he have read it.
The court said now if he says yes then you can ask. Did you consider the statements made in those documents? But you can't go on and then say, well, shouldn't you have heeded that warning?
Mr. Kamraju said, I do not intend, and the questions that Your Honor is formulating. Like, shouldn't you have, I have no intention, that was not, I don't think I've asked one of those questions. But that was not my intention.
The court said, wouldn't a reasonable person have? Wouldn't you advise your client to? Nothing like that.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay, Your Honor.
Mr. Finkel said, Your Honor, if I may. And I understand the court's ruling. The problem is a victim saying that they didn't read the documents. The implication that's left for the jury is potentially, well, they should have. And that's not the correct statement of how that's not a correct statement of law as to how this evidence should be considered.
The court said, people don't even read the instructions on their iPhones.
Mr. Finkel said, I know.
The court said, and so I think that average jurors would not necessarily have the expectation that someone would read a prospectus.
Mr. Finkel said, so, Your Honor, we don't know what the jury is thinking obviously. And so the government's request is just that the jury be instructed as to the law so they know how to contextualize this evidence. That's all.
The court said, I think an instruction on this discrete aspect of the law, this particular defense or lack of a defense, is drawing attention to or supporting an argument of the government instead of truly clarifying. So let's bring the witness back and the jurors back.
Mr. Kamraju said, Your Honor, I'm sorry, can I just have one last verification?
The court said yes.
Mr. Kamraju said, if he says yes and I ask him, did you consider statements in the prospectus? Am I allowed to point him to particular statements in the prospectus?
The court said yes.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay. Thank you, Your Honor.
The court said, to the extent that he said he read them, you may point him to those particular statements.
Mr. Kamraju said, okay. So I.
The court said, and you may ask if you've considered them.
Mr. Kamraju said, I can put up a statement and say, did you read this?
The court said yes.
Mr. Kamraju said, and if he says yes, I can say, did you consider it? And if he says no, move on.
The court said right. But if he says, I did not read the prospectus, then you cannot bring up those.
Mr. Kamraju said, understood.
The court said yes. Anything further, Mr. Finkel?
Mr. Finkel said, no, Your Honor. Rising because I think the jury is about to enter.
The court said okay.
Jury present.
The court said, would you have the witness return to the stand, please?
Witness present.
The court said, remember, sir, that you're still under oath. And please be seated. And you may continue the cross-examination.
Mr. Kamraju said, thank you, Your Honor.
By Mr. Kamraju.
Sir, I think when we broke, we were discussing a document called the prospectus. Do you remember that?
Which document? Sorry.
I think we referred to it as the prospectus. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Prior to sending money to VOG, did you read the prospectus?
I never received that.
So you never received a copy of the prospectus. Okay. Thank you. Now, you testified on direct, well. I'm sorry. Mr. Kamraju said, could we pull up Government Exhibit GXC 63T, please, June 2, 2020 video translation. Could we go to page 9? Please. I believe you testified about some part of this. Mr. Kamraju said, but if we could blow up the box on the right that starts, we had an initial valuation of 200 million.
Yes, I see that.
See that? All right. And you see where it says, the private placement exceeded the highest expectations and raised $350 million, correct?
Yes.
So the private placement, in fact, raised more money than was originally being sought, right?
That was part of VOG, yes.
Well, the VOG money you testified was separate, right?
No, is part of this. Private placement.
So the $350 million that's being referred to, that's part of VOG, is part of that?
No.
Okay. It's separate, right?
Yes.
Mr. Kamaraju said, okay. And if we can go down on, just a little bit further down in that box. No, I'm sorry. If you could just, the sentence that starts, this is up to now this figure and through, yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay. So you see it says, let's say 350 million. 350 million does not include the 117 million from VOG, right? See that?
The 350 doesn't include the 117, that's correct.
Right. The 117 million, which is coming in through VOG, is separate from the 350 million that was raised as part of the private placement, right?
No, it's not separate from the private placement, it was included in the private placement. It's just separate fund, 350.
Well, you testified on direct that there were a certain number of seats, right?
Yes.
There were 2,000 seats, right?
That was previously Miles mentioned it, yes.
Well, I'm asking what your understanding was, sir.
When was introduced it to us as including me? Miles Gua mentioned it private placement and also public placement, the differences, then he explained it. Private placement, if there were limitations, their seats, 2,000 seats. Then if it exceeds that limitations, then it will be kind of different placement.
Okay. So the private placement could have had 2,000 seats. Can I just ask you? When you say, seats, what do you mean?
His original words translate to English called long chair o chair, ph.
Well, sir, I'm sorry, I'm not asking for a translation. I'm just asking what your understanding of the word seat is when you use it.
My understanding is called long position.
Your understanding is it's a long position.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. What does that mean?
That's a financial term for investment. People before the private investments. Those are people will invest and hold their stocks for certain periods.
Okay. So the seats are people who buy and hold their stock for a certain period?
Yeah. And also they are considered as the first investors.
Okay. So they are the first set of investors, right?
Correct.
And there were 2,000 of seats available in the private placement, correct?
Correct.
And then there was a separate set of money that came in related to VOG, right?
The separate money, the VOG, was for the people's investment that was under certain amounts.
I'm sorry, sir, but that wasn't my question, right? My question is the money that came in through VOG is separate from the money that you're talking about that comes in through the seats? Right?
That I don't know.
Okay. But you invested through VOG, that was your understanding, right?
Correct.
And you testified that you got the wire information from Sarah Wei, is that right?
That's correct.
But you never directly corresponded with Sarah Wei, right?
I messaged her, she replied.
With the wire information?
Yes. So the emails.
Now, we talked about how you had met with prosecutors before, right?
Yes.
Do you remember telling the prosecutors that you never had direct communication with Ms. Wei?
I told them I contacted Sarah Wei, yes.
I'm sorry.
I told them I contacted Sarah Wei direct.
Okay. So there was somebody taking notes during that interview, right?
I didn't take notes.
I said there was somebody taking notes, right?
I didn't see who was taking notes.
I'm not asking if you saw who, I'm asking did you see somebody taking notes, sir?
I don't know.
Mr. Kamraju said, all right. Can we bring up Government Exhibit GXVO80, please? I believe this is in evidence. So we can publish it. And can we just blow up that first paragraph? Okay. And do you see there's a name there, Lihong Weila friends? It's in the fourth line down. Mr. Kumraju said, there you go. Thank you, sir. Do you see that?
Yes.
That's Sarah Wei, right?
That's her legal name, right?
Do you recognize this? This is the limited purpose agency agreement that you signed with Ms. Wei. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And this is in connection with your GTV investment?
Correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, okay. The government offers GX. I'm sorry, the government. Apologies, Your Honor. The defense. Long afternoon already. The defense offers GXVO 80 into evidence.
The court said, no objection?
Ms. Murray said, no objection.
The court said, it is admitted.
Government's Exhibit VO80 received in evidence.
Mr. Kumraju said, sorry about that.
By Mr. Kumraju.
So just to clear it up, the name that's highlighted, that's Sarah Wei, correct?
Correct.
And through this agreement you're designating Ms. Wei to be your agent for purposes of buying GTV shares. Correct?
Correct.
You don't designate Mr. Guo for those purposes, right?
No.
You don't have any contract designating any authority to Mr. Guo over your purchases, right?
Not with him, no.
I was just asking about him. Not with him, right?
Not with him.
You don't have a farm loan agreement with Mr. Guo, right?
No.
You don't have a G Clubs agreement with Mr. Guo, right?
I never receive a G Club agreement.
Okay. So then you don't have one with him, right?
No.
You don't have an agreement to buy H coin with Mr. Guo, right?
No.
Okay. And you, in fact, never spoke directly with Mr. Guo about buying H coin, right?
No.
You never spoke directly with Mr. Guo about buying G Clubs, right?
No.
You never spoke directly with Mr. Guo about buying GTV shares, right?
No.
Now, there comes a point when there's a disagreement between Mr. Guo and Ms. Wei, correct?
I'm not sure if it's a disagreement, words would be accurate.
You understood that they had a bit of a falling out, right?
Yes.
And Mr. Guo made public statements about Ms. Wei, correct?
Yes.
He encouraged supporters to contact law enforcement about Ms. Wei, right?
Ms. Murray said, objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
The court said, if you'll step up.
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
The court said, so why is it that these statements could come in?
Mr. Kumraju said, well, I'm not offering them for their truth at all. I'm offering them for the fact that he said them and the fact that he's inviting scrutiny from law enforcement and public law filings. Which is inconsistent with the idea that he had a guilty intent at the time. If he was trying to hide what he was doing, he wouldn't have told people to bring the FBI in. They are not being offered for their truth, they're just being offered for the fact that he's inviting that to happen.
The court said, what was it that he said about Ms. Wei?
Mr. Kumraju said, he said a number of things about Ms. Wei. But what I have in the 3500 material is that he asked supporters to contact law enforcement, including the FBI, about what Ms. Wei had done.
The court said, what was it that he claimed she did?
Mr. Kumraju said, stolen money from the farm loan program.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, the defendant is welcome to testify about that. We can't, it's just not permissible to backdoor in the defendant's statements through this manner about what he may or may not have said to people about Ms. Wei.
Mr. Kumraju said, it has to be offered for the truth to be hearsay. That's foundational. We're not offering it for the truth.
The court said, what is it that if the witness is aware that the statement was made, how is it relevant to his testimony?
Mr. Kumraju said, well, He testified about the fact that the money he gave his money to Sarah Wei so that Sarah Wei would make a GTV investment on his behalf. He just testified he had an agency agreement with Ms. Wei to do that for him. Mr. Gov't and many other people think that Sarah Wei, who, our understanding is going to be a witness at this trial, stole the money. And my point simply is that if a person who's involved in a fraud or is alleged to be involved in a fraud says, "Hey, FBI, come look at what I'm doing," that suggests that they don't have a guilty conscience, Your Honor. And much of their.
The court said, I don't understand why it is this witness has to testify about having heard that statement.
Mr. Kumraju said, because he told the prosecutors about it, Your Honor. It's not as if I'm planning.
The court said, but what is the purpose? How is it relevant? Did he act upon the statement?
Mr. Kumraju said, he did actually act upon the statement.
The court said, how so?
Mr. Kumraju said, he filed complaints with various local law enforcement agencies.
The court said, and how is it relevant to whether or not your client is guilty?
Mr. Kumraju said, whether he filed them, I'm not arguing that is relevant. What I'm arguing is the fact that Mr. Gov't is asking people to look at what's happening here is the exact opposite of consciousness of guilt.
The court said, right. But you're just trying to get that statement in through this witness. The objection is sustained.
Mr. Kumraju said, can I ask for the basis, Your Honor? Is it relevance or is it hearsay?
The court said, there's no question that it's hearsay.
Mr. Kumraju said, I don't mean to argue with the court. I just want to understand how it's being offered for the truth.
The court said, you want to get the statement in to show that your client had an adverse relationship with Ms. Wei.
Mr. Kumraju said, no. I'm asking to get the statement in to show that my client is not afraid of the FBI looking at what he was doing.
Ms. Shrofa said, it's a state of mind.
The court said, examining what she was doing.
Mr. Kumraju said, no. Because their allegation is that Ms. Wei is a part and parcel of the GTV conspiracy.
The court said, okay, so I don't know what her role is.
Ms. Murray said, so Ms. Wei operated a company. She was one of the farm leaders. And that particular farm was used to aggregate non-accredited investors' money. So Miles Gov't made it available in violation of securities law to people who had less than $100,000. And he said, why don't you go to Ms. Wei, and she'll aggregate all of your money. And it will look like a legitimate investment from voice of Gov't that's above the threshold. So another way to kind of evaded the securities regulations. We agree with Your Honor, this is not the witness to bring in what Mr. Kumraju is trying to bring in.
Mr. Kumraju said, but I still don't understand. If their allegation is that Ms. Wei was part of conduct that they're alleging is criminal on behalf of Mr. Gov't, the statement is not being offered for the truth and the defense argument is that he's asking from sunlight to be put on the conduct, which is inconsistent.
The court said, but why does it come in through this witness?
Mr. Kumraju said, I'm not sure why it can't come in through this witness, Your Honor. I understand that there are other witnesses that, indiscernible, may prefer that it comes through the defendant. But I'm not aware of an evidentiary objection that says it can't come in through this witness as opposed to some other witness.
Ms. Shrofa said, or through multiple witnesses. That's not an evidentiary objection.
Ms. Murray said, Your Honor, it's our view the court has ruled on this matter. I understand Mr. Kumraju is just continuing to litigate it. But we agree with your ruling on this. The objection should be sustained. We should move on.
The court said, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Continued on next page. In open court.
The court said, sustained. Go ahead.
By Mr. Kumraju.
Now, sir, you testified before about the Himalaya farms, correct?
Yes.
And there's a structure to those farms, right?
Yes.
There are different positions within the farms, right?
Correct.
So there's a farm leader, right?
Yes.
And then the farm leader may have others who sort of assist them, correct?
Correct.
Did you have a position in any farm, sir?
My position was OBS streamer for the farm.
OBS streamer for the farm.
Yes.
Okay. What does OBS stand for?
It's a software platform name. It's open software. Allow you to connect your computer and the cameras, broadcast to designated location, like YouTube push it out to it. Or push it to other sources.
Okay. And then above the farms comes the alliance, right?
Yes.
So all the farm leaders are part of the alliance, that's your understanding, right?
Yes.
And so they set policy for the farms, is that your understanding?
Yes.
And then above them is something called the Iron Blood Group, is that right?
No, not above.
Okay. I'm sorry. You explain it to me. I may have it wrong.
Iron Blood Group was launched by Milesqua. There were 3 members at the beginning. Eventually expanded to a larger group. All the member was selected by Milesqua.
Okay. But the group had some authority, right?
They have their roles.
Sir, I'm not trying to trick you. But didn't you tell the prosecutors that the Iron Blood Group had full authority to run the farms?
Not run the farm.
Okay. So what kind of authority did they have over the farm, sir?
Iron Blood member will act as higher management group to managing the farm leaders. And also they have the designated roles.
Okay. So they each may have designated roles within the Iron Blood Group, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So one of the members of the Iron Blood Group was called Mulan, right?
Yes.
Mulan is not her real name, right?
No.
What's her real name?
Leah.
And Ms. Wei was a member of the Iron Blood Group at one point, correct?
Excuse me. You mean Sarah Wei?
Yes.
I don't recall that.
Okay. How about the leader of the UK farm? He was a member of the Iron Blood Group.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you did more for the UK farm than just do streaming, correct?
Correct.
Mr. Kumraju said, actually, Your Honor, I am about to turn to a different subject. I just wanted to note the time and see if Your Honor wanted to continue.
The court said, well, if you're going to another subject, then this would be an appropriate time to stop, even though it's only 2:40 p.m.
Mr. Kumraju said, I will take credit for the 5-minute break, Your Honor.
The court said, all righty. So, members of the jury, we will stop our work for today. You'll return tomorrow on time, as you did today, so that you'll be able to walk through this door at 9:30 a.m. Remember that you're not allowed to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. Don't permit anyone to have any discussions in your presence. Have a good evening.
Jury not present.
The court said, sir, you may step out. Don't discuss the testimony.
The witness said, yes, Your Honor. Witness not present.
The court said, and you may be seated. Is there anything that the parties want to raise before we continue tomorrow morning?
Ms. Murray said, may we have a brief sidebar, Your Honor?
The court said yes.
Ms. Murray said, thank you.
Continued on next page. At sidebar.
The court said, I forgot to mention that the note that I received from alternate no.
Ms. Shrofa said, 5.
The court said, 5 yesterday, I made court exhibit number 1. It came in at 12:10 p.m., and I dated the exhibit Friday, May 23, 2024. What's the issue?
Ms. Murray said, yes, Your Honor.
The court said, fine with me.
Ms. Shrofa said, we have no objection.
Mr. Kumraju said, yeah, that's fine, Your Honor.
The court said, anything further?
Ms. Murray said, we just asked to seal this part of sidebar.
The court said, and it is sealed.
Ms. Murray said, thank you.
Ms. Shrofa said, Your Honor, does the court want to do anything with juror number 5? I know when we broke before the weekend. The thought was to excuse him.
The court said, "Oh, you're talking about alternate number 5?
Ms. Shrofa said, "Yes, Your Honor."
The court said, "Oh, I don't recall our decision to excuse him. Am I not recalling it correctly?"
Mr. Kamraju said, "That was at least my understanding. I thought Your Honor was, because I thought we had a discussion about how to excuse him without alerting the rest of the jury. Which is why we thought you had brought him back instead to not tip off the jury. We may have misunderstood. That was our understanding."
The court said, "So is he even still here?"
Ms. Shrofa said, "He is here, Your Honor."
The court said, "All right. I'll excuse him."
Ms. Shrofa said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
In open court.
The court said, "Just a reminder, counsel, I have proceedings after this matter, so you'll need to clear the tables."
Juror present.
The court said, "You're alternate number 5. You may be seated."
Juror said, "I am alternate 5.
The court said, "In light of your scheduling issues, I am excusing you from jury service. Thank you for your willingness to serve."
Juror said, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Juror not present.
The court said, "Anything further?"
Mr. Finkel said, "Not from the government."
Mr. Kamraju said, "Not from us, Your Honor."
The court said, "Thank you."
Adjourned to May 29, 2024 at 9 a.m.